It was a warm summer afternoon in the small town of Ridgewood. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and kids were out enjoying the last few hours of daylight before heading home for dinner. Among them was a 12-year-old girl with big dreams and an even bigger heart. She loved playing basketball, and that day she had spent hours at the local park shooting hoops with her friends. When the sun started dipping lower in the sky, she decided it was time to head back. Instead of taking the long route through the main street, she opted for a shortcut through a narrow alleyway behind the shops. It wasn't uncommon for people to use this path. It saved time and felt safe enough during the day. But what happened next would change everything. Not just for her, but for the entire town. As she walked briskly, lost in thought about how many baskets she'd made that afternoon, she noticed a police car slowly pulling up beside her. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern and unsmiling. One of them, a tall man with broad shoulders, approached her while the other stayed near the car watching silently. "Hey, kid," the taller officer said sharply, his tone making her stop in her tracks. "What are you doing here?" The girl blinked, confused. "I'm just walking home," she replied softly, clutching her backpack tighter. Her voice trembled slightly because she could sense something wasn't right. Why were they stopping her? She hadn't done anything wrong, but the officer didn't seem satisfied. He glanced around as if searching for clues, then turned back to her. "You sure about that? We got reports of someone stealing from the stores nearby." Her eyes widened. "No, sir, I swear I didn't steal anything." She tried to explain herself, telling him she'd been at the park all afternoon, but he cut her off mid-sentence. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. Then came the moment that would haunt her and everyone else who heard about it for days, weeks, and months to come. The officer went back to his patrol car and opened the trunk. From inside, he pulled out a thick rope, the kind used for tying things down or securing equipment. Without saying another word, he grabbed her wrist and began wrapping the rope tightly around her hands, binding them behind her back. The girl froze, too stunned to react. Tears welled up in her eyes as panic set in. What was happening? Why was this happening? A woman passing by saw the whole thing unfold. Horrified, she pulled out her phone and started recording. Her hands shook as she captured the scene, the frightened child, the cold demeanor of the officers, and the unthinkable act of using a rope on someone so young. Within minutes of uploading the video online, it spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with outrage. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. How could anyone treat a child like this? By nightfall, the hashtag Justice for the Girl trended across the country. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of the girl's tear-streaked face and the cruel act that had been inflicted upon her. Conversations about racism, policing, and accountability dominated living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces everywhere. In Ridgewood, the community was shaken to its core. Neighbors who had known each other for years suddenly found themselves questioning the very system meant to protect them. Parents hugged their children a little tighter that evening, wondering if something similar could happen to them. And somewhere in the midst of all the chaos, the girl sat quietly at home, trying to process what had happened to her. Her parents, overwhelmed with anger and sadness, struggled to find the words to comfort her. They knew this wasn't just about one bad decision by two reckless officers. It was about a pattern, a history, a broken system that needed to be fixed. As the world watched and waited, one question lingered in everyone's mind. What would happen next? Would justice prevail? Or would this become yet another forgotten headline? Little did anyone know. Help was already on the way. Someone powerful had taken notice of the situation, and their arrival would send shockwaves through Ridgewood and beyond. The sun had barely risen the next morning, but Ridgewood was already buzzing with energy. News of the incident involving the young girl had spread like wildfire, and it seemed everyone had something to say. People gathered in coffee shops, on street corners, and even outside the police station, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. The video showing the officers using a rope on the child played on repeat on social media, fueling outrage across the nation. For many residents, this wasn't just about one horrifying moment. It was a reflection of years of simmering tension between the community and law enforcement. By mid-morning, a crowd began forming outside the police station. Some held handmade signs that read, "No justice, no peace, and protect our kids." Others chanted slogans demanding accountability. Among them were local activists who had long fought against racial profiling and police misconduct. One of them, a middle-aged pastor known for his fiery speeches, stood on the steps of the station with a megaphone. His voice boomed as he addressed the growing crowd. "This is not just about one child," he said, his tone firm but filled with emotion. "This is about every black child who has ever been treated like they don't matter. We will not stand by while our children are treated like criminals." His words struck a chord, and the crowd erupted in cheers. But amidst the noise, there was also pain. Parents clutched their children close, tears streaming down their faces as they imagined what the young girl must have felt. A few feet away, an elderly woman sat quietly on a bench, shaking her head. When asked how she felt, she simply said, "It's always the same story. Why does it take something this bad to make people listen?" Inside the police station, things weren't much calmer. Reporters camped out at the entrance, shouting questions at anyone who dared to step outside. Chief of Police, a grizzled man, in his late 50s, tried to address the chaos during a hastily arranged press conference. He looked visibly uncomfortable under the glare of cameras and the weight of public scrutiny. "We are taking this matter very seriously," he said, reading from a prepared statement. "An internal investigation has been launched, and we are committed to ensuring transparency and fairness." But his words did little to calm the storm. Protesters shouted back, calling for immediate action. "Investigations aren't enough," someone yelled. "Fire those officers now." Another voice chimed in, "How many times do we have to see this before you actually do something?" As the day wore on, more details emerged. Anonymous sources within the police department revealed that the officer who used the rope had a history of complaints filed against him. None of those complaints had led to any real consequences, which only added to the frustration. Community leaders pointed out that this pattern of ignoring misconduct was part of a larger problem, one that needed to be addressed urgently. Meanwhile, the young girl's family found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Her mother, a hard-working nurse, spoke at a press conference organized by local activists. With her daughter standing beside her, she recounted the events of the previous day. Her voice cracked as she described how her child came home sobbing, her wrists bruised and her spirit shattered. "My baby didn't deserve this," she said, her hands trembling as she gripped the podium. "She went to play basketball like any other kid. And now she's scared to even leave the house. What kind of world are we living in where a child can't walk home without being treated like an animal?" Her words resonated deeply with those listening. Many nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. It was clear that this wasn't just a legal issue, it was personal. Families saw themselves in her story, imagining the fear and helplessness they would feel if it were their own child. As night fell, the protest continued. Candles flickered in the darkness as hundreds gathered for a vigil in honor of the young girl. Songs of hope and resilience filled the air, along with heartfelt speeches from community members. One teenager stepped forward, holding a poster with a simple message, "We matter too. I'm here because I could have been her," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm tired of feeling afraid. I'm tired of being treated differently. We all deserve better." The vigil ended with a call to action. Leaders urged residents to keep pushing for change, not just in Ridgewood but everywhere. They encouraged people to contact their representatives, attend town hall meetings, and support organizations working toward justice reform. This wasn't just about one town or one family. It was about creating a future where no child had to endure such cruelty. Back at home, the young girl tried to process everything that had happened. She scrolled through her phone, seeing strangers sharing her story and calling for justice. Part of her felt grateful for the support, but another part felt overwhelmed. Why had this happened to her? Would things ever go back to normal? Her parents did their best to shield her from the worst of the media frenzy, but it was impossible to ignore completely. Every knock on the door, Every phone call, every news update served as a reminder of what she had gone through. Still, amid the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. People cared, people were fighting for her and for others like her. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. National news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Ridgewood. Celebrities, politicians, and activists weighed in, amplifying the calls for accountability. Slowly but surely, it became clear that this case wouldn't fade away quietly. Something or someone was going to force change. And then, just when it seemed like the town couldn't handle any more drama, a bombshell dropped. Someone powerful was coming to Ridgewood. Someone who had built a reputation for standing up to injustice and refusing to back down. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community, leaving everyone wondering what would happen next. Quen 2.5 Max. The news broke early one morning, catching everyone by surprise. A high-ranking official, someone whose name carried weight and authority, had decided to step in personally. It wasn't just any official. It was the Attorney General herself. Known for her relentless pursuit of justice and fairness, she had built a reputation as someone who didn't shy away from tough cases, especially those involving systemic issues like racism and abuse of power. Her announcement sent shockwaves through Ridgewood. At first, people weren't sure what to think. Some were skeptical, wondering if this was just another empty gesture meant to calm the growing unrest. Others felt a flicker of hope, believing that maybe, just maybe, this could be the moment things finally changed. Either way, the town braced itself for what was coming next. By noon, the Attorney General arrived in Ridgewood. She came without fanfare, stepping out of a modest sedan wearing a no-nonsense expression that told everyone she meant business. Accompanied by a small team of investigators, she wasted no time getting to work. Her first stop? The police station. Inside, tension hung thick in the air. Officers exchanged nervous glances as they watched her stride down the hallway, her presence commanding respect and fear. She requested an immediate meeting with the chief of police. What happened behind closed doors during that meeting remains unclear, but sources later revealed that the conversation was anything but friendly. The Attorney General grilled him about the department's handling of complaints against officers, particularly the one involved in the incident with the young girl. She demanded answers, and when she didn't get them quickly enough, her frustration became impossible to hide. "You've had years to address these issues," she reportedly said, her voice sharp. "And yet here we are, dealing with the same problems over and over again. Why should anyone trust you now?" After leaving the station, she turned her attention to the community. That evening, she met with local leaders, activists, and members of the young girl's family. Sitting around a large table at the town hall, she listened intently as they shared their stories. Not just about the recent incident, but about years of mistreatment and neglect. One elderly woman recounted how her grandson had been stopped multiple times while walking home from school, always for no reason other than the color of his skin. Another man spoke about being pulled over so many times he'd lost count, each encounter chipping away at his dignity. When it was the young girl's turn to speak, the room fell silent. Clutching her mother's hand, she described how scared she had been that day in the alley. Her voice wavered as she talked about the rope, the officer's cold stares, and the feeling of helplessness that followed her home. For a moment, the Attorney General simply sat there, taking it all in. Then, leaning forward slightly, she looked the girl straight in the eye. "I promise you," she said firmly, "this will not go unanswered. You deserve justice, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you get it." Her words brought tears to the eyes of everyone in the room. For the first time since the incident, the family felt like someone truly understood their pain and was willing to fight for them. The next day, the Attorney General held a press conference outside the courthouse. Dozens of reporters gathered, eager to hear what she had to say. Standing at the podium, she wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "This case is about more than two officers making a terrible decision," she began, her tone measured but forceful. "It's about a system that allows such decisions to happen in the first place. It's about accountability, or the lack thereof. and it's about ensuring that every child in this country feels safe in their own neighborhood. She announced that she would personally oversee the investigation into the incident, vowing to leave no stone unturned. In addition, she revealed plans to form a special task force aimed at reviewing practices within the Ridgewood Police Department. This wasn't just about punishing those responsible, it was about preventing similar incidents from happening again. Not everyone welcomed her involvement. Some officers pushed back, claiming they were being unfairly targeted. Supporters of the two officers involved in the incident organized counter-protests, arguing that the entire situation was being blown out of proportion. Anonymous messages criticizing the Attorney General flooded social media, accusing her of playing politics and undermining law enforcement. But she remained undeterred, brushing off the criticism with quiet determination. Behind the scenes, her team worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and poring over years of internal records. They uncovered troubling patterns, complaints filed against certain officers that had gone ignored, disciplinary actions that were either too lenient or non-existent, and training programs that failed to address implicit bias. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of a broken system and reinforced the need for sweeping reforms. As days turned into weeks, the attorney's presence loomed large over Ridgewood. People debated her methods, questioned her motives, and speculated about the outcome of her investigation. But one thing was undeniable. She had ignited a spark. Conversations about race, policing, and accountability dominated dinner tables, classrooms, and workplaces. Even those who initially doubted her intentions found themselves drawn into the discussion, forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their community. For the young girl and her family, the Attorney General's arrival marked a turning point. Knowing that someone with real power was fighting for them gave them strength during a time when they needed it most. They attended meetings, spoke at rallies, and shared their story with anyone who would listen. Their courage inspired others to come forward, shedding light on injustices they had endured in silence for far too long. Ridgewood was changing, slowly but surely. The protests continued, but now they carried a renewed sense of purpose. Community members rallied together, organizing workshops, fundraisers, and educational events aimed at fostering understanding and healing. Local businesses pledged to hire more diverse staff, while schools introduced programs focused on empathy and inclusion. It was clear that the town was beginning to reckon with its past and chart a new course for its future. Still, challenges lay ahead. The road to justice is rarely smooth, and there were bound to be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long time, people dared to believe that change was possible. And at the center of it all stood the young girl whose bravery had sparked a movement fueled by hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief that even the smallest voice can make a difference. The Attorney General's presence in Ridgewood had stirred up a hornet's nest, and not everyone was happy about it. While some cheered her efforts to hold the police accountable, others dug their heels in, refusing to accept that there was anything fundamentally wrong with the system. Tension simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. Back at the police station, whispers of discontent spread among the officers. Many felt attacked, as though they were being painted with the same brush as the two involved in the incident. Some even began wearing black armbands as a sign of solidarity with their colleagues. "We're out here risking our lives every day," one officer muttered during a lunch break. "And now we're the bad guys?" Their frustration spilled into public view when a group of officers held a press conference of their own. Flanked by lawyers and union representatives, they defended their actions, or at least tried to. They claimed the young girl had acted suspiciously, though they couldn't provide concrete evidence to back up their claims. One officer went so far as to say, "We were just doing our job. If people don't like how we do it, maybe they should try walking in our shoes for a day." But their words fell flat. The community wasn't buying it. Protesters showed up outside the press conference, holding signs that read, "Your job isn't above the law," and "Accountability saves lives." Chants echoed through the streets, drowning out the officers' arguments. It was clear that trust between the police and the residents of Ridgewood had been shattered, and no amount of excuses could fix it overnight. Meanwhile, anonymous threats began rolling in against the Attorney General and her team. Late-night phone calls, menacing emails, and even graffiti appeared around town warning her to back off, but she refused to be intimidated. At a fiery town hall meeting, she addressed the threats head-on, standing tall before a packed auditorium. "Letty, me make one thing crystal clear," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I didn't come here to win popularity contests or make friends. I came here because justice demands it, and if anyone thinks they can scare me away from doing my job, they're sorely mistaken." Her defiance only fueled the anger of her critics, but it also galvanized her supporters. People lined up for hours to attend her town halls, eager to share their experiences and offer their backing. Parents spoke about fearing for their children's safety. Teenagers recounted stories of being followed in stores or pulled over while driving. Even former officers came forward, admitting they'd seen racist behavior within the department but hadn't known how to report it without risking their careers. One particularly emotional moment came when a middle-aged man took the microphone. His hands trembled as he told the crowd about his nephew, who had died in police custody years ago. "They said it was an accident," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "But we all know what really happened. Nothing changed then. No one cared. But maybe, just maybe, this time will be different." The Attorney General listened intently, nodding occasionally, but mostly letting people speak uninterrupted. When it was her turn to respond, she didn't sugarcoat things. She acknowledged the pain and frustration in the room, promising that she wouldn't rest until meaningful reforms were put in place. But she also warned that change wouldn't happen overnight. "This isn't going to be easy," she admitted. "There will be resistance, there will be pushback, but if we stand together, if we demand better from ourselves and from each other, we can build something stronger, fairer, and more just than what we have today." Her honesty resonated with the crowd, earning her a standing ovation. For many, it was the first time they'd felt truly heard by someone in power. Behind the scenes, the Attorney General's team worked tirelessly to gather evidence. They subpoenaed internal police records, reviewed body camera footage, and interviewed dozens of witnesses. What they uncovered painted a damning picture. The officer who had used the rope on the young girl had a history of complaints filed against him, yet none had resulted in serious consequences. Training programs designed to address racial bias were outdated and poorly enforced. And perhaps, most troubling of all, there was a culture of silence within the department, officers too afraid to speak up when they saw misconduct for fear of retaliation. Armed with this information, the Attorney General made her next move. She filed formal charges against both officers involved in the incident, accusing them of abuse of power and unlawful restraint. The charges sent shockwaves through the town, dividing residents once again. Supporters celebrated the decision, calling it a long-overdue step toward accountability. Critics argued that the officers were being made scapegoats, claiming the real problem lay elsewhere. As the legal process unfolded, the Attorney General turned her attention to broader systemic issues. She announced plans to implement sweeping reforms within the Ridgewood Police Department, including mandatory de-escalation training, stricter oversight measures, and the creation of a civilian review board to handle complaints against officers. These proposals sparked heated debates, with some praising them as necessary steps forward, and others dismissing them as unnecessary bureaucracy. Through it all, the young girl at the center of the storm remained a symbol of hope and resilience. Despite the trauma she had endured, she continued to speak out, attending rallies and sharing her story whenever she was asked. Her courage inspired countless others to do the same, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond Ridgewood. The time the trial date was set, the entire nation seemed to be watching. News outlets covered every development, analyzing courtroom proceedings and dissecting expert testimonies. Activists organized marches in cities across the country, carrying banners with messages of solidarity for the young girl and her family. Social media buzzed with hashtags calling for justice, ensuring that the case stayed in the public eye. Yet even as momentum built, there were moments of doubt. Would the officers be convicted? Would the reforms stick? Or would they fade away? Once the spotlight moved on, no one knew for sure. But one thing was certain: Ridgewood would never be the same again. The town had been forced to confront its deepest flaws, and whether it liked it or not, the journey toward healing had begun. For the young girl and her family, the fight was far from over. But for the first time, they felt like they weren't alone. Thousands of strangers had rallied to their side, offering support, prayers, and promises to keep pushing for change. Together, they had ignited a movement, one that refused to let injustice go unanswered. And as the world waited to see what would happen next, one question lingered in everyone's mind. Could this case finally be the catalyst for lasting change? The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial, with every seat occupied and reporters jostling for space near the front. It felt like the entire town, and maybe even the country, was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The air was thick with tension, a mix of anticipation and dread hanging over everyone present. For the young girl at the center of it all, sitting quietly beside her family, the scene must have been overwhelming. Cameras flashed as she entered, but she kept her head down, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Her bravery in showing up to face the officers who had wronged her didn't go unnoticed. Inside, the prosecution laid out their case methodically. They called witness after witness, community members, experts, even former police officers, to paint a picture of systemic neglect and abuse. One psychologist spoke about the lasting trauma caused by such incidents, explaining how children are especially vulnerable to the psychological scars left behind. Another expert discussed racial profiling, presenting data that showed alarming disparities in how Black individuals were treated compared to others during routine stops. Each testimony added another layer to the story, making it impossible to ignore the broader implications of what had happened. When it came time for the young girl to take the stand, you could hear a pin drop. She walked slowly to the witness box, her small frame dwarfed by the heavy wooden chair she sat in. Her voice wavered as she recounted the events of that fateful afternoon. The fear she felt when the officers approached her, the shock of seeing the rope, and the humiliation of being tied up like an animal. At one point she paused, tears streaming down her face, unable to continue. Her mother reached out instinctively, offering silent support from the gallery. The defense team tried to poke holes in her account, suggesting she might have misunderstood the officers' intentions or exaggerated the severity of the situation, but their arguments rang hollow. Even some of the jurors exchanged skeptical glances, clearly struggling to reconcile the officers' version of events with the evidence presented before them. As the days dragged on, more revelations came to light. Internal documents obtained by the Attorney General's team exposed years of unchecked misconduct within the department. Complaints filed against the officers involved ranged from excessive force to discriminatory behavior, yet none had led to any real consequences. Emails revealed dismissive responses from higher-ups whenever concerns were raised, often brushing off allegations as minor misunderstandings. These details painted a damning portrait of a system designed to protect itself, rather than serve the public. By the time closing arguments rolled around, emotions ran high. The prosecutor delivered a passionate speech, reminding the jury that this wasn't just about punishing two individuals. It was about sending a message that no one was above the law. "This is about accountability," he said, his voice steady, but filled with conviction. "It's about saying loud and clear that we will not tolerate cruelty disguised as authority. Justice isn't blind, it sees everything." On the other side, the defense argued that their clients had simply made a mistake under pressure, a lapse in judgment, not malice. They urged leniency, claiming that locking up two officers wouldn't solve the larger issues plaguing law enforcement. While their words may have resonated with some, they couldn't undo the mountain of evidence stacked against them. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the verdict came in: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted into cheers and applause while the officers sat stone-faced, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Outside, news crews scrambled to capture reactions from the crowd. Protesters chanted victory slogans, waving signs that read, "Justice prevails" and "No more excuses." For many, the ruling felt like a long overdue acknowledgement of the pain endured by countless victims of similar injustices. But the Attorney General wasn't done yet. In addition to sentencing the officers to prison terms, she announced sweeping reforms aimed at preventing future abuses. Every officer in Ridgewood would now be required to wear body cameras, ensuring transparency during interactions with the public. A civilian oversight board was established to review complaints against law enforcement, giving residents a direct line of accountability. Training programs focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity became mandatory for all personnel. These changes sparked mixed reactions. Some praised the measures as bold steps forward, while others grumbled about unnecessary bureaucracy slowing down police work. Still, few could deny that something significant had shifted in Ridgewood. Conversations once avoided were now happening openly, at kitchen tables, school assemblies, and community meetings. People began asking hard questions about privilege, power, and responsibility, unwilling to let old habits die quietly. Inspired by the young girl's courage, students at the local high school launched initiatives promoting inclusivity and understanding. Murals celebrating diversity popped up around town, turning blank walls into vibrant canvases of hope. Local businesses pledged to hire more minority employees and create safer spaces for marginalized groups. Slowly but surely, Ridgewood started to transform, not because of grand gestures but through countless small acts of determination and solidarity. For the young girl and her family, life remained complicated. Healing takes time, and wounds run deep, yet there was a newfound sense of purpose in their struggle. Knowing that their fight had inspired so many gave them strength to keep moving forward. Their story reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, resilience can spark a movement, one capable of lighting the path toward justice. And though challenges still loomed ahead, the town carried a quiet optimism. Change never happens overnight, but Ridgewood proved that it begins when people refuse to stay silent. Together, they had taken the first step toward building a fairer, kinder world. A year had passed since the incident that shook Ridgewood to its core. The town looked different now, not just in the physical sense, but in the way people carried themselves, spoke to one another, and thought about their shared future. Change doesn't happen overnight, but the seeds planted during those turbulent months were beginning to take root. And for the young girl at the center of it all, life had started to find a new rhythm, still challenging, still scarred, but also filled with hope. One crisp autumn morning, thousands gathered in Washington, D.C., for the annual Justice March. It was a sea of faces, young and old, united by a common goal, to demand fairness, equality, and accountability. Among them stood the same 12-year-old girl who had once been afraid to walk home alone. Now 13, she climbed the steps of the stage, her heart pounding as cameras flashed and the crowd fell silent. She gripped the microphone tightly, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I never wanted this," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't ask for any of this to happen to me, but it did. And because it did, I learned something important, that my voice matters. Your voice matters. We can't let fear or anger silence us." Her words resonated deeply. She talked about the pain of being treated like an outsider in her own neighborhood, the nights she spent crying herself to sleep, and the countless times she questioned whether things would ever get better. But she also spoke about forgiveness, not because what happened to her was okay, but because holding on to hate wouldn't bring real change. "We can't fix everything overnight," she continued, "but if we keep fighting, if we keep standing up for each other, then maybe someday no kid will have to feel the way I did." The crowd erupted into applause, cheering her on as tears streamed down her cheeks. For many, she wasn't just a victim of injustice anymore. She was a symbol of resilience, proof that even the smallest voices could ignite movements. Parents hugged their children tighter. Activists vowed to double down on their efforts, and strangers exchanged knowing glances, reminded of why they had come together in the first place. Back in Ridgewood, the transformation continued. A mural honoring the young girl was unveiled in the park where she used to play basketball, the very place where her ordeal began. Painted by local artists, it depicted her standing tall against a backdrop of vibrant colors, surrounded by hands reaching out in solidarity. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Courage starts with one voice." Every day, people stopped to admire the artwork, some leaving flowers or notes of gratitude. Teachers brought their students to see it, using the moment to talk about empathy, justice, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Slowly, the mural became more than just art. It became a reminder of how far the town had come and how much further it still needed to go. In the months following the trial, the reforms pushed through by the Attorney General began to show results. The Civilian Oversight Board received dozens of complaints, each taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Officers attended mandatory training sessions, learning not just about de-escalation tactics, but also about the impact of bias and prejudice. Some admitted privately that they hadn't realized how their actions affected others until they heard firsthand accounts from community members. Local businesses got involved too. A popular cafe hosted weekly discussions called Coffee and Conversations, inviting residents to share their thoughts on policing and race relations. A bookstore set up a section dedicated to books about social justice, encouraging readers to educate themselves and engage in meaningful dialogue. Even the schools joined in, organizing workshops and assemblies focused on celebrating diversity and fostering inclusion. Still, there were moments when progress felt fragile. Tensions occasionally flared between residents and police, especially when old habits resurfaced. But instead of sweeping these incidents under the rug, people addressed them head-on. Community leaders organized forums where grievances could be aired openly, creating space for healing and understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For the young girl's family, life remained a balancing act. Her parents worked tirelessly to shield her from negativity while encouraging her to embrace her role as an advocate. They enrolled her in therapy to help process the trauma and celebrated every small victory along the way. On tough days, they reminded her and themselves that she wasn't alone. Thousands of people across the country had rallied behind her, turning her story into a catalyst for change. As winter approached, the town prepared for its annual holiday festival. This year, organizers decided to dedicate the event to unity and resilience. Booths lined the streets showcasing art, music, and food from diverse cultures. Local performers took the stage, sharing stories of struggle and triumph through song and dance. At the center of it all stood the young girl, invited to light the ceremonial tree. As she flipped the switch, the tree illuminated the night sky, casting a warm glow over the smiling faces below. It was a moment of quiet reflection for many. Ridgewood wasn't perfect, it likely never would be, but it was trying. That effort mattered. The scars of the past couldn't be erased, but they could serve as reminders of why the fight for justice was so important. Months later, the young girl sat in her room, scrolling through messages sent by people inspired by her courage. Some thanked her for giving them the strength to speak out. Others shared their own stories of overcoming adversity, hoping to offer her comfort in return. She smiled softly, feeling a sense of connection she hadn't expected. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly have challenges, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Ridgewood had changed, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to prove that change was possible. And as long as people refused to stay silent, refused to accept injustice, and refused to give up, the world would inch closer to becoming a fairer place, one step at a time.